Welcome to part 2, a week spent with the LPSC crew as guests of Charlie Ellis and Crystal Combs at their beach house in Weekapaug, Rhode Island, with day cruises on Block Island Sound, June 4th to the 15th, 2015. After completing our 5-day, 110-mile cruise on the Erie Canal, we returned to the launch ramp at Seneca Lake State Park late in the afternoon of June 3rd to haul out and put our La Dolce Vita back on the trailer. Once our boat was secured, we hit the road again, heading east on the New York Thruway, bound for Rhode Island, 370 miles away. Since we departed late in the day, we boondocked camp that night, sleeping in the boat while parked at a Walmart Supercenter in Utica, New York, before arriving at the Ellis Beach House in Rhode Island on the afternoon of June 4th to meet up with fellow Lake Pleasant Sailing Club sailors, 10 in all. This map shows a route from Seneca Lake in New York to Weekapaug, near the town of Westerly on the seashore in Rhode Island. The Ellis Beach House is located a short 330 or so yard stroll from access to a private, neighborhood-only ocean beach on Block Island Sound. Here's the 3-story Ellis Beach House on Meadow Avenue in Weekapaug. Weekapaug is an idyllic setting for a summer vacation. Seen here at sunrise, this shallow pond is located just east of the beach house, where several of us were able to rake buckets full of hard-shell quahog clams, which were used to make delicious chowders. Tasty steamed clams and chowders were not the only seafood treats to be indulged in. As the crew pitched in to serve up a feast of whole-boiled New England lobsters, one for each person, with baked potatoes, grilled corn on the cob, sides, and garlic toast bread, accompanied by John Pendleton's famous raft-up cocktails. To our host, cheers! And then there was the lovely oceanfront beach. Crowds? What crowds? We don't got no stinking crowds. This was a private beach, open only to owners and guests of the Weekapaug neighborhood properties. An attraction not to be missed was a day at Mystic Seaport Village Maritime Museum in nearby Mystic, Connecticut, a living history museum showcasing the halcyon days of New England whalers of the early to mid-19th century. The centerpiece of the museum is this restored 1841 whaling ship, the Charles W. Morgan. Living history demonstrations are staged there every day by museum staffers, seen here performing sea shantings with a fiddle and bones. They would go from one exhibit to the next and talk about various aspects of the whaling life. In this next series of 3 short video clips, a group, including myself and Mark Coffin, learned the proper way for salty sailors to hoist sail on a whaling ship.
So Liz is going to tie it on to the line pin, but she needs all the line that you have in your hands to get the slack to get it around there. So she needs you to throw it down. Her command for that sounds like this.
Come up behind!
So when you come up behind, just throw it on the desk. Yeah, don't pass it to her, throw it.
Throw it right down.
Just drop it. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Perfect. Hello, somebody, hello. You pull on the H of hello each time. I'll sing a line in between each pair of pulls where you don't pull. You just get a very brief rest. So it'll be hello, somebody, hello, pull, somebody, pull. And then a brief rest while I sing the line in between. And remember those commands at the end. Here we go. Oh, somebody's knocking. Wait till you're singing.
You didn't say hello yet.
Right? Somebody's knocking on the garden gate. Hello, somebody. John from Baltimore. Hello, somebody. Hello. Well, on the eastern shore. Hello, somebody. Hello. John was the boy from me. Hello, somebody. Hello. Land down a bucko at sea. Hello, somebody. Hello. John, I knew him well. Hello, somebody. Hello. But now he's dead and he's roasting in the flames of. Hello, somebody. Hello.
Okay, come up behind.
Eager to get in on some new real England sailing, a group of us got together and carpooled over to Newport, Rhode Island on June 11th and chipped in on an exciting day sail excursion in Newport Harbor aboard the Heritage, a 1970 12-meter America's Cup Trials contender. It did not advance past the finals that year and thus did not qualify in its only attempt to compete in the main America's Cup race series. Our crew consisted of Charlie Ellis, Charles and Sally Harris, Mark and Emily Kaufman, John and Mary Pendleton, Greg and Amanda Woodcock, and myself. And a salty crew it were, by thunder. But wait just a minute. Didn't we bring our own boat along to Rhode Island? Oh yeah, well I guess we did. Once in Rhode Island, Charlie Ellis helped us out by putting his local knowledge to work and found a marina on the Pawcatuck River that, with a little horse trading, allowed us to keep our La Dolce Vita in a guest slip for $100 for the week. A major savings over their regular rates. Thanks, Charlie. With Charlie and Crystal's help, we got La Dolce Vita launched at a municipal ramp on the Pawcatuck River in Westerly, Rhode Island, and docked in a guest slip and Norwest Marina, a short distance downriver on the Connecticut side just south of Westerly. Pawcatuck River forms part of the state line between Connecticut and Rhode Island. I still needed to spend some time chasing parts and dealing with some unresolved issues with the brakes on our trailer. So, along with everything else, we only had time for 2 day trips on La Dolce Vita. On our first day trip with the Albin, we went down the Pawcatuck to Block Island Sound, proceeded west along the coast over to the Thames River, the locals pronounce it like it's spelled, not Thames like the Brits, and up to New London as far as the Naval Submarine Base, with a stop for lunch in New London. Our crew, along with Charlie and Crystal and ourselves, also included Charles and Sally Harris. This is the USS Nautilus, SSN 571. The world's first nuclear-powered submarine is now open to the public as a museum ship at New London, and is the only decommissioned nuclear sub preserved as a museum, as photographed from La Dolce Vita in the Thames River. You think cabins are cramped below decks on a small sailboat? Try this. Sleeping quarters for 10 men on the USS Nautilus. On our second day trip with the Albin, we again went downriver on the Pawcatuck, this time heading east along the coast, hoping to get as far as Weekapaug. But this was on Friday, June 12th, the day we were due to haul out, and we needed to get back to the ramp in time for the afternoon high tide. So we only had enough time to get within 3 miles of Weekapaug before we had to turn back. Our guests aboard this time were Mark and Emily. This was Watch Hill Point. And so ended the Rhode Island chapter of our epic 2015 summer trailer boating road trip. We took leave of our fellow Lake Pleasant Sailing Club shipmates Charlie Ellis, Crystal Combs, Charles and Sally Harris, Mark and Emily Kaufman, John and Mary Pendleton, and Greg and Amanda Woodcock, preparing once more to hit the road. Next stop, my own childhood hometown of Barnegat, New Jersey, on the Jersey Shore, 35 miles north of Atlantic City, roughly 275 miles from Weekapaug. End of Part 2. Up next, Part 3 of our 2015 trailer boating road trip covering New Jersey, Delaware, and a 2-week, 300 nautical mile cruise on the Chesapeake Bay. Welcome to Part 3 covering New Jersey, Delaware, and a 2-week, 300 nautical mile cruise on the Chesapeake Bay. Leaving Weekapaug, we took a slightly roundabout route, skirting north and west to avoid the congested New York City metro area. We stayed for 2 nights in New Jersey, visiting one of my half-brothers in Manahawkin, as well as a step-aunt and a old school chum in Barnegat before continuing on down the coast to Cape May. At Cape May, we took the ferry across the Delaware Bay to Lewis, Delaware, and on to Seaford, our launch point on the Nanticoke River for the Chesapeake Bay cruise. Here's the Cape May Lewis ferry boat, New Jersey, that we sailed on. The Cape May Lighthouse, at 157.5 feet tall, it's one of the tallest lighthouses in the United States and one of the oldest. It was built in 1859. It's still in commission as a functioning aid to navigation. And here we put La Dolce Vita on board the ferry vessel New Jersey. Some Lake Pleasant Sailing Club members may remember my late stepdad Lee Simons, who lived in Delaware, moving there from upstate New York with my late mother Pat after retiring in the early 1980s to settle in Laurel near Seaford. Lee had come out west to visit me a couple times after Mom passed away in 2003, and even attended one of our Lake Pleasant Sailing Club wine and cheese party events a few years ago at Mark and Emily Kaufman's home. Though not a boat owner himself, Lee had joined the Nanticoke River Yacht Club in Blades, Delaware after my mother's death and became very active and well liked in the club. Lee was so well liked by his friends at the Nanticoke River Yacht Club that, knowing he was terminally ill with cancer, the club took the unprecedented step of awarding him the title of Honorary Commodore, something never done before since their founding in 1974. To this day, his picture, shown here at lower left, hangs on their clubhouse wall alongside portraits of other former Commodores. I have met many of those folks during several visits over the course of the years before Lee's passing in 2011 at the age of 90, and have stayed in touch with some of them ever since. This was the primary reason why we chose Seaford as the launch point for our Chesapeake cruise and flew the Nanticoke River Yacht Club Burgee on our jackstaff in his honor during most of our cruise on the Chesapeake. Our launch point was a marina at the head of the Nanticoke River in Blades near Seaford, Delaware. It has an excellent launch ramp and full facilities including gated long-term storage for truck and trailer. The Nanticoke, like other tributaries on the Chesapeake, is part of the Tidewater region and subject to twice daily high and low tides. It's always best to try to time your launchings to coincide with high tide as much as possible. And so off we went on June 22nd, motoring 35 nautical miles downriver toward the mouth of the Nanticoke River and onto the Chesapeake Bay. Here's the 300-mile course that we followed for the next 2 weeks down the Nanticoke, across the bay to Solomons, up the Patuxent River, back to the bay, and northeast to Cambridge on the Choptank, then back the back way to St. Michael's via San Domingo Creek, then Oxford on the Tread Avon before returning to Solomons, and finally back to Seaford to haul out. A few miles downstream from our launch point on the Nanticoke, there's a small 6-car, cable-guided car ferry called the Woodland Ferry. One of the oldest continuously operated ferry services in the country, its origins date back to the 1740s when it was known as the Cannon Ferry, after the name of its original proprietor. It operates year-round and is a free service maintained by the Delaware Department of Transportation. Boaters have to yield the right-of-way while the ferry is crossing, since it lifts a guide cable off the river bottom as it crosses. Next, a brief midday stop for lunch at the town dock in Vienna, Maryland, several miles downstream from the state line. The region is often referred to as Delmarva, a peninsula which consists of the entire state of Delaware, with portions of Maryland to its south and west, and a bit of Virginia at the southern tip. Covering 35 miles at our 6.5 knot cruising speed is an all-day affair. We stopped overnight at this small marina in Byval, Maryland, before reaching the open bay. And we're on the Chesapeake Bay at last. Woohoo! This was not my first Chesapeake Bay cruising experience, nor the first time I had trailered a boat across the country from Arizona. Back in 2002, I had sailed a similar course in my Montgomery 15 sailboat to meet up with other Monty sailors, including Doug Kelch, who now lives in Anthem. Except that time I had launched from a ramp on the eastern shore of the bay itself, directly across from Solomon's, not way up the Nanticoke as we did this time. Our primary tools for navigation throughout our time on the Chesapeake were my Garmin GPS Map 76CX GPS, loaded with blue chart plotter software, including depth soundings and all buoys and markers, as well as an 11x17 chart book covering all the Chesapeake Bay, and the Cruising the Chesapeake, a Guncoaler's Guide book by William H. Schellenberger. On Tuesday, June 23rd, we made our 6.5-hour crossing from Bivalve over to Solomon's at the mouth of the Patuxent River. Seen here is the Hooper Island Light, which is built on a caisson out in the middle of the bay. There are numerous full-service marinas to pick from in and around Solomon's. We chose to dock at Spring Cove Marina in an area known as Back Creek. Somewhat expensive transient slip fees, but very nice facilities, including a pool with an on-site poolside bar. One cannot swim in the Chesapeake due to the presence of poisonous jellyfish called sea nettles. It was a very hot day that day, mid-90s and humid. We got a ride from a Marina Courtesy shuttle vehicle to the Lighthouse restaurant for lunch and had Spanish chef salad and crab cakes. We came back to the marina and swam in the pool. The heat is very exhausting, even with fans in the cabin. We took a short dinghy ride around the harbor before sunset, but tucked back into the cabin to ride out an approaching thunderstorm, which ended up dumping heavy rains with lots of lightning. We were glad to be docked in a sheltered marina slip. These nasty little stinging sea nettle jellyfish are the reason why one does not go swimming in the Chesapeake. While in Solomon's, we toured the nearby Calvert Marine Museum. In addition to all sorts of marine history and antique boat exhibits, it also has extensive exhibits on marine biology and archaeology, since many prehistoric fossils of marine life have been found in the Calvert Cliffs, which line the western shore of the Chesapeake, just north of the Patuxent River. The Drum Point Lighthouse is the centerpiece of the Calvert Marine Museum. Typical of the 19th century screw pile cottage lighthouse design, it was built in 1883 and originally located off Drum Point, near the mouth of the Patuxent River. Decommissioned in 1962, it was left derelict until moved to the museum grounds and restored in 1975. It is one of 3 remaining examples of the 45 lighthouses which were once located around the bay through the early 20th century. Built over water and anchored into the mud bottom by screw piles, that is, iron pipes with auger bits at the end, they included living quarters for full-time lighthouse keepers and could only be accessed by boat. Leaving Solomon's on June 24th, we headed up the Patuxent River to the first major tributary, St. Leonard's Creek. Now a peaceful stretch of water, it was once the site of a War of 1812 naval skirmish between the British Royal Navy and a small fleet of American gunboat barges commanded by Commodore Joshua Barney. That afternoon, we dropped anchor in Johns Creek, a secluded little cove near the head of St. Leonard's Creek, 2¼ miles upstream from Patuxent. Our destination was Vera's Beach Club Bar, Restaurant, and Marina, a well-known local landmark since 1953. Neptune, or Poseidon if you will, and his mermaid greeted us as we stepped ashore, only to learn that the restaurant was closed during the week and only open from Thursday to Sunday, and we had arrived on a Wednesday. Vera sits on a high bluff with a scenic view overlooking St. Leonard's Creek. Creek is a relative term here since St. Leonard's is as wide in places as the Colorado River. Using their criteria, the Colorado would be called Colorado Creek. In any case, there was not much else to do here, so we stayed the night grilling brats on board for dinner, and the next morning went back to the Patuxent and continued a few more miles upstream to Stoney's Seafood Restaurant at Brooms Island for a lunch of, you guessed it, Maryland crab cakes. We returned to Vera's later that afternoon and took a guest slip at their marina for the night. Vera's ran a Thursday special of a dozen steamed Maryland crabs for $36, which was enough to provide Helen and I our fill with enough left over to make a second meal. Here's Stoney's Dock and Dine Seafood Restaurant at Brooms Island. I had been here once before back in 2002 with the Montgomery Sailboat Owners Group Rendezvous. On Friday, June 26, we left Vera's Marina and headed back toward Solomon's with a stop on the way to tour the Sotterley Plantation, a colonial-era living history museum on the west bank of the Patuxent. On arrival in Solomon's, we dropped anchor in a cove in Back Creek opposite the Calvert Museum. For supper, we picked the meat off the 5 leftover crabs from the previous night's dinner at Vera's and made crab salad to eat with fresh tomatoes and had margaritas to drink. The next day, June 27th, we remained at anchor, riding out foul weather. There was rain and winds blowing southeast at 10 to 15 knots with gusts to 30 and small craft warnings. Late in the day, we moved to a slip in Calvert Marina. Another big storm as bad as the one on Tuesday night of June 23rd was expected. On June 28th, we again stayed in port at Solomon's. There were small craft advisories posted for the bay, so we decided to wait another day for calmer conditions before heading over to the eastern shore. By June 29th, the weather had cleared with much better conditions in store, so after cooking breakfast on board, taking showers, buying ice, and pumping out our holding tank, we departed from Solomon's about 11:30 a.m., heading northeast bound for Cambridge on the eastern shores of Choptank River. Once again, we were back out on the open bay skirting Calvert Cliffs. It was a fine day to be out on the water, and life was good. La Dolce Vita, the sweet life. After a 7-hour crossing, we arrived at Cambridge Yacht Basin in the historic town of Cambridge. We would remain in the area for the next 5 days over the 4th of July holiday. Cambridge is a quaint colonial-era town with a population of about 12,000. Located on the Choptank River of Maryland's eastern shore, Cambridge is the seat of Dorchester County and the 4th largest municipality on Maryland's eastern shore after Salisbury, Elkton, and Easton. Many homes and buildings along the tree-lined streets of Cambridge date back to the late 18th and early 19th centuries, as well as a good choice of restaurants and fresh seafood markets. The Cambridge Yacht Club controls about half the slips in the Cambridge Municipal Yacht Basin, the other half being run by the city. Since we had some connections with the Nanticoke River Yacht Club, we had hoped to wrangle some free reciprocal docking privileges from CYC, but no such luck. Everybody has to pay $1.50 a foot regardless of any other club memberships. But the restroom and shower facilities were among the best we've seen anywhere. We docked there June 29th and 30th. On July 1st, after 2 nights at the CYC guest slip, we departed Cambridge Yacht Basin and motored about 6 miles northwest downriver and across to the north side of the Choptank River and into a sheltered anchorage called Martin Cove on La Trappe Creek. Huge palatial waterfront mansion estates can be seen fronting the banks of La Trappe Creek. cove next to Martin Point at the mouth of Latrap Creek is sheltered from all directions when tucked into the southwest corner in the lee of the narrow sandspit beach. On Wednesday, July 1st, we ducked into the cove past Martin Point Sandspit and anchored in 9 feet of water. We dinghied over to the small beach on the Sandspit, met with some other cruising folks who had 3 sailboats rafted up. Rain and thunderstorms came overnight and the next morning. Thursday, July 2nd, we remained at anchor in Latrap Creek. The rain the previous night continued off and on, heavy at times. Fog rolled in around 9:30 to 10 a.m. This was the 4th episode of rain in 10 days of cruising so far. Looked like a rainy day ahead, so we stayed put at anchor for the time being. We remained at anchor overnight and took the dinghy ashore to the Sandspit in early evening for a short walk. On Friday, July 3rd, we weighed anchor and returned to Cambridge. After stopping at the municipal fuel dock in the yacht basin to buy ice and pump out our holding tank, we tied up for the night to the free concrete side-tie dock in the Cambridge Creek turning basin. In this satellite view, you can see the municipal yacht basin at the upper right with the Cambridge Yacht Club and the Cambridge Creek turning basin at lower right, downtown, where you can dock for free at the concrete side-tied dock. We returned to the CYC Marina on July 4th in hopes of seeing a good fireworks display that night. The fireworks were nearly canceled when a rain squall blew through at dusk, leaving behind this pretty rainbow. The show did go on after a short delay, but the fireworks were somewhat disappointing, not particularly outstanding compared to what we'd seen last year in the San Juans up in Washington State. The CYC folks put on a big catered party with close to 200 people attending, but the meal of hot dogs and burgers cost $25 per person, a bit more than we wanted to spend, so we opted not to join in. On Sunday, July 5th, we left Cambridge for the last time, heading for the town of St. Michael's on the Miles River. But instead of going out into the bay around Tillman Island and up Miles River to St. Michael's front door, we took a shortcut the back way up San Domingo Creek to a shallow anchorage on the southwest edge of town. This map shows our course from Cambridge at lower right up to St. Michael's in the upper center via San Domingo Creek. You can see if we had gone around Tillman Island out into the bay and to the Miles River and down to the front door of Michael's, it would have added many, many miles to our trip. St. Michael's is a rather small town with a population barely over 1,000, but it's home to the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum. From our anchorage, in 3 feet of water, it was a short half-mile walk across town to the main waterfront. And here's St. Michael's waterfront on the Miles River. The same storm that prompted Cambridge to delay their fireworks show on the 4th caused St. Michael's to postpone their fireworks until July 5th, which worked out well for us since we got to see 2 sets of 4th of July fireworks displays, and St. Michael's, though a much smaller town, put on a better show than Cambridge did. The following video clip is a very short bit of the finale.
Unbelievable. That was really
Cruising log entry dated Monday, July 6, 2015. Begin return trip to Blades, Delaware today. Motored back south to the Tread Avon River and over to Oxford in search of a fuel dock as we were nearing 20 hours running time on the engine since our last refueling stop in Solomon's on June 26. Refuel with 9.4 gallons, bought a bag of ice, proceeded across to the north side of the Tread Avon River and up Plain Dealing Creek to anchor in a cove at latitude north 38 degrees 43.0 minutes, longitude 76 degrees 10.4 minutes west. Supper on board, ham, steak, and green beans. Rain shower overnight, nice cooling breeze, overnight lows mid-70s. Due to the fact that there weren't many good places to stop on the eastern shore between Oxford and the Nanticoke River, we opted to return to Solomons and spend the night at anchor there before making a direct run back to the ramp at Seaford. La Dolce Vita cruising log, July 7th. Woke up before sunrise to see one small crab boat nearby already hard at work. Took our time with morning coffee and cereal for breakfast. Went from flat conditions in the cove to choppy water once we got to the Tread Avon River. Lots of fishing boats, both commercial and private, several making good use of trot lines. The bay was much smoother, allowing a pleasant cruise across and down the channel to Solomons. Note that trot lines are a method of crabbing where long lines, sometimes 100 feet or more in length, with bait tied on every few feet, are dropped in the water to lay on the bottom and secured with floats attached at each end. The crab boat has a bracket hook attached to the stern that slowly lifts the trot line near the surface as the boat goes along, and the waterman scoops crabs off the line with a hand net. Once in Solomons, we dropped anchor off the channel in Bat Creek in the same spot as before, across from the Calvert Museum. The boat was so hot inside on arrival at Solomons that we immediately launched the dinghy and went over to the Lighthouse restaurant where we'd had dinner before. We took the dinghy for a ride around the harbor, stopping for ice and supplies at the Spring Cove Marina's convenience store. Nice cold ice cream bars helped us brave the muggy heat. Back at the boat, we sat on deck and watched the sunset after having a light dinner. Our 12-volt fans are a godsend. We weighed anchor on the Chesapeake for the last time early in the morning of July 8th. La Dolce Vita cruising log, final entry July 8th, 2015. Departed anchorage and Bat Creek at Solomons at first light. Choppy passage across the Chesapeake Bay from Solomons past Hooper's Island to Nanticoke River, hoping to beat possible rain and thunderstorms, which did not materialize. Bucked ebb tide current in the Nanticoke, which slowed our GPS speed over ground to 4.5 to 5 knots at 2,350 RPM, which is usually good for 6.5 knots in calm conditions with no current. We arrived at Nanticoke Marina at 7 p.m., took showers in the marina restrooms. We still had the door combinations from earlier. Got our truck out of storage lot and drove to Seaford for dinner at Applebee's. 12.5 hours underway, a long run. Stayed in the slip one last night and hauled out the following morning, July 9th. Thus ends the main part of our 2015 Chesapeake cruise.
Rock and roll is here to stay. Super Island Light out there.
Epilogue. Our arrival in Seaford just happened to coincide with an annual Riverfest event being put on by the town of Seaford, in which hundreds of people did a float down the river for about a mile using anything and everything for rafts. A small group from the Nanticoke Yacht Club got hold of a raft made out of an emergency evacuation slide from a Boeing 737 aircraft that was provided by one of the club members who works at an aircraft maintenance facility. They invited Helen and I to join in the fun. This is former Nanticoke River Yacht Club Commodore Alan Johnson, who provided this fun raft for the Riverfest.
We made it!
Yay!
Everybody's still with us? Everybody still has their head?
How did Steve make it?
I got it.
We We stayed on for another week in Delaware as guests at the home of Wayne and Nancy Hickman, dear friends of my dad's from the Nanticoke River Yacht Club. We had a great time relaxing after our 2 weeks on the water, and they took us for a ride to the beach on the Atlantic in Chincoteague, Virginia, with a stop shown here at NASA's Wallops Island Atmospheric Research Center and rocket launching site. But now at last it was time to head for home and back to reality. Taking to the road on July 15th for the final 2,400-mile leg of our journey, we spent 2 nights camping and 3 nights in hotels with a stop along the way to tour the Antietam Civil War battlefield in Sharpsburg, Maryland. Arriving home on July 21st, it's time to start planning the next year's cruise.